But it felt like the South Pole 10 years after going blind was a suitable marker that I dealt with the blindness, that I put the demons of blindness behind me.
Mm-hmm.
But it took 10 years for me to really deal with the blindness.
Welcome to the 7 Day Soul TV and the A Tweak a Week podcast. If you are someone who wants to reach your full potential, who feels like you have more to give, who doesn't want to let your short time here slip through your fingers, then you finally found your tribe. I'm your host, psychologist and author Susanna Healy, and on this show, we'll be talking with expert researchers about all things psyche and soul so that you can achieve your full potential and live a life without regrets. To reach the better angels of our nature, we know the devil's in the detail of what we do repeatedly. So we'll be talking habits, existential health, bucket lists, meaning, mattering, sleep, self-actualization, responsibility, discipline, faith, procrastination, gratitude, goal setting, sex, focus, careers, and loads more. Let's inject the everyday with a passion for your potential. But before we start, just a reminder, if you like the show, then don't forget to subscribe. You can also get your free 100 tips for daily progress by visiting the 7daysoul.com homepage. Or if your workplace is all about human potential and you'd like to sponsor the show, then reach out to join us. Details are in the show notes. Hi there and welcome everyone to the A Tweak a Week podcast, episode number 5. And boy, am I excited to have such a top class guest here with me today. It's Mr. Mark Pollock. Many of you may have heard of him before, and if you were lucky enough to have heard him speak, it's something you've got to do. You really do. This is just one exciting person who will just absolutely explode you with motivation. And I have to say, Mark, when I was going over all your background and your stories and your TED Talks and everything, I literally had to keep kind of taking a break, going away, walking the dog and letting it all just sink in, and kind of, I have to admit, a bit kind of like making me review my life and kind of go, oh boy, I thought I was doing okay.
Well, I'll tell you, I wouldn't recommend it.
I think I need to up my game a fair bit. But anyway, I literally had to keep kind of like taking breaks and go, okay, I need to keep coming back to this all the time to keep inspiring me. But we're going to talk about that. But anyway, welcome, Mark, to the show. And a thousand thanks for being with us all and giving us your time.
Oh, delighted to be here.
Great. Mark, for those listeners who haven't perhaps heard your story before, or probably have heard your name, but maybe not all your story, can you tell us a bit about your life story so far?
Yeah, it's a 3-parter. And when I was young, for whatever reason, I just always wanted to compete. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't allowed to compete in the normal sports, the normal sports in my school, rugby, hockey, cricket, any of the contact sports. So I became a rower and a sailor and a runner. And right through to the age of 22, I was rowing competitively for the university. I went to Trinity, and also breaking into the Irish team. And when I was 22, very suddenly I went blind through detached retinas, and that desire to compete conspired to get me back in a boat, going and racing at the Commonwealth Games, winning silver and bronze medals, and then becoming an adventure athlete, racing in deserts and mountains and oceans all over the world. And eventually I did a 43-day expedition race to the South Pole when I was blind. And just when I thought I'd reached the pinnacle again, or my Olympic Games, it was at that point that I fell out a window and broke my back and started the third chapter. And really what I did there was I couldn't be an adventure athlete anymore, or at least I could go and do the adventures, but I couldn't race as a blind and paralysed person. So I switched my attention to curing paralysis in our lifetime, but really applying the skills of what I'd learned in sport, what I'd learned in putting expedition teams together, turning up in the gym and training, putting teams together, raising money, telling the story, and sticking in there for a long, long time. And I applied all of that to trying to walk again.
It's absolutely incredible story, and a story of having to pick yourself up over and over again. And was there a huge sense, Mark, of unfairness, or at what stage did you, or presumably you have, kind of got over the sense of getting stuck on this is unfair?
Now it's a big question,
Mm,
and I hesitate there because I must have felt that it was unfair at some
mm,
point, but I didn't think it for very long.
mm,
I do remember thinking, oh, or why me, very, very briefly. But there is no answer to the question of why
mm,
me.
mm,
So if you spend your life thinking, oh, why me, you'll always have the question, but you'll never have an answer. And if you spend your life thinking this is unfair, you'll always find a reason and some evidence to suggest why it's unfair. Particularly if you compare yourself to anyone who's better off than you, which is you'll always find someone who's doing better than you. So
mm,
those kinds of questions were not questions that I, in some cases, remember asking myself, or indeed questions that I dwelt on for too long. And and I think coming from competitive sport as an early teen, mixed in with the problems that I had with my eyes, it probably informed how I dealt with the blindness and how I dealt with the paralysis. And my old rowing coach, who was a Latin and classic scholar and completely harsh and very
mm,
black and white,
mm,
um, prompted me to always try and live in a place where I'm, no matter what happens, I try to, as quickly as possible, move through the denial, the anger, the blame, the miracle seeking, the self pity, and try and get to the acceptance of the new starting point, or as I think of it now, influenced by Admiral James Stockdale, confronting the brutal facts, the good, the bad, the ugly, as a starting point. I always kind of try to get to that facts inventory as a launch pad for moving on. But the why me, this is unfair, is a never ending cycle, which I I suspect would just eat you up.
mm, mm. And so there's kind of an element of kind of stoic philosophy in there, obviously, from your rowing instructor, by the sounds of things.
Well, funny, I emailed him recently, and but during lockdowns, actually, I emailed him and said, because I'd only really come to the Stoics in the last number of years yet,
Mm,
I'd been attracted to stories of people who I now know to be Stoics,
mm.
and I said to Bill Jakes, I said, Bill, in it just in an email, I've been reading about Marcus Aurelius and
Yeah,
Seneca
yeah,
and
yeah,
Epictetus, and
yeah.
are you a Stoic? And he just wrote back. No, he didn't even say my first name or sign his name off. He just wrote back and he said, the Greeks had it worked out before the Stoics existed.
Right. Okay. Put the Stoics in their place.
Because they were just a sort of a subset of what the Greeks had been thinking about.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, about Stoicism is what it is not is small s Stoicism. It's not the Victorian stiff upper lip British
Mhm.
Stoicism where you move forward with no emotion, and it's not the hard man version of small s Stoicism. Stoicism is capital S Stoic philosophy, which is confronting the brutal facts, differentiating between what you can and can't control, um, and get focusing on what you can control.
Mhm.
And the third element, which which is where I sort of majorly step away from Stoicism, is extending timelines towards a better future fueled by hope. And the
Yeah.
Stoics thought that hope was just the flip side of despair, and they're very much about anchoring yourself in the
Mhm.
in the present moment, which of course a lot of us were trying to get to that point. I actually think yes, we have to confront the facts, which is about being in the present. Yes, we have to differentiate between what we can and can't control, but I think as human beings, we need something to go for, and we need to extend timelines way beyond the challenge or the crisis and fuel ourselves with hope.
I totally agree with you, and I actually teach mindfulness, and it's really useful, but it's a skill of, because I think so many people are living, in the past and regurgitating or whatever it might be, going over and over and over all the various different things that might have happened and worry in the future. Then it's great to be able to place your mind when you want to in the present. But as you say, I mean, hope keeps people alive.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes people live longer. It's enormously important to human health and well-being.
And this is something which after my paralysis, in the hospital, the head psychologist in England particularly was suggesting that I should cancel hope because hoping for a cure has proven to be psychologically damaging. Now, really, I think over time, as the anger disappeared from, probably anger directed at my injury rather than at the psychologist, but we always have to manifest
Yes.
someone to
Yeah,
blame.
yeah.
Um, I think what he was saying is that if you rely on hope alone and the best case scenario doesn't play out, then you run the risk of being disappointed and demoralized. But the way I've come to make sense of what his message was, I think what he was trying to do in these very extreme situations, like a spinal unit, first you have to do what Stockdale suggests: is you need to confront the brutal facts. You need to get comfortable with the facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then, for me, that means being in a wheelchair and perhaps never getting out of it. And then running alongside that, I think we need hope. So I've made sense of it by being a realist,
Mhm.
balancing acceptance and hope, running both of those things in parallel, and not a question of either or.
Yeah, a realistic optimism. Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, like who is it? Viktor Frankl talks about
Frankel, yeah,
tragic optimism.
yeah.
I think the optimists have as much, or so the realists have as much hope as the optimists. So they both have the same amount of hope. The realists just confront the brutal facts as well. So
Mhm.
there's a sort of an anchoring in the new starting point. So
Okay.
acceptance and realism or acceptance and hope running in parallel for the realists, hope alone for the optimists.
Okay. Okay. And is this something, Mark? Because obviously you said yourself, you kind of like the competitive spirit was in you, and as you say, you picked up obviously these kind of like mental skills, as it were. Was it something that you did? This kind of, this move to kind of hope and realism. Was it a very conscious thing that you had to do and keep doing, and you found yourself getting pulled back, or did it come? Did you feel it kind of came naturally to you that was your way of thinking now?
Uh, no, I think I've necessarily had to think about these things
Mm,
because of the two big moments that happened. The onset of blindness when I was 22, breaking my back when I was 34. Because when these things happen, you change from the person that you were before acquiring the disability, as defined by the things that you were doing. And the things that I was doing before blindness were all, they were a life with sight. And when
mm,
you lose your sight, you can't do lots of those things, or you have to do them in a different way. So it calls into question your identity. Who are you if you can't do the things that you were doing? What? Because those things define your identity. So
mm,
you have to come up with a new identity
mm.
after the moment. When I broke my back again, I couldn't be an adventure athlete anymore. So I had to work out who I was and how I fitted in to the world. So I spent a lot of time thinking about these things, thinking about the starting point, thinking about how I was going to move forward from that point, and thinking about what I was going to do or what I was going to go for in the future. So I've also, so I've thought a lot about these things.
Mm.
I've thought about a lot about my identity. I've looked at a lot of research from philosophy and psychology and neuroscience to see what the experts have done in their research to explain why I'm responding as I am. And I've kind of, packaged it all up into a neat, simple way of understanding the world. But I go back to these things again and again and again, because when it comes to resilience, I have this kind of facts, anchoring, and hope cycle that I look to. But then resilience, just because you go blind or break your back, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily all about resilience,
Yeah.
or that's where it ends. Because I'm equally interested in fact, I'm more interested in what comes after the acceptance of the new starting point. I've found myself a little bit guilty, in fact, that I wasn't that interested in the literature around survivors and post-traumatic stress and the trauma literature.
Mm.
I found myself more interested in the performance literature, and
Right.
you're into mindfulness and these,
Mm.
these non-ordinary states of consciousness, like
Mm.
mindfulness, psychedelic,
Mm-hmm.
medical psychedelics. I'm interested in flow states as
Mm-hmm.
one of the other ones. So I was interested in resilience. I'm interested in performance and flow states, feeling at our best and performing at our best. And then the third thing I'm very conscious of is that we neither we're neither resilient nor do we perform well on our own. We're always connected with other people. So I'm interested in collaboration and trust. So these three pillars of resilience, performance, and collaboration are things that I think about, read about, try and put into practice, get wrong, fail at, go again,
Mm-hmm.
and so these things keep appearing. And the other thing is that they keep appearing again and again and again, regardless of racing to the South Pole, going blind, trying to cure paralysis. They just seem to come up again and again and again for me.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, I mean, you talk about the flow states, and you're talking about states in general, because it's like kind of like sometimes, like I think sometimes there's a particular state that's in fashion at any one time. It's flow, or
Yeah,
it's mindfulness, or it's whatever.
yeah.
And these are all states that are all available to us. In my last episode, I was speaking about dissociative versus associative states. So sometimes kind of coming into the now and like mindfulness. And sometimes the times we need to kind of get out of the moment, like for hypnosis for pain. I used it for childbirth, and various times of kind of getting away from the moment, from in the
Mm.
mind at least. But I'm really interested in terms of your South Pole expedition. What did you find the most challenging there? Was it the kind of the physical challenge that actually you don't have time to be thinking about the mental aspect because your body is so physically challenged that that takes precedence, or did you need to kind of like manage the mind to keep going? Did you have self-doubt about making it?
Oh yeah, I mean, the self doubt and the possibility of failure is why the project meant so much by the time we finished it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it was actually a conscious decision to do something that was a little bit, as it turned out, quite a lot beyond what I was comfortable with,
Yeah.
because I'd been rowing, training 12 times a week. I had then done 6 marathons in a week in the Gobi Desert. I'd done the North Pole Marathon, the Everest Marathon, Dead Sea Ultra, the Zurich Ironman. So I was getting pretty comfortable doing these 1 day, 2 day, 5 day type events, and they'd started as physical challenges. I didn't know whether I could do 6 marathons in a week in the Gobi
Mm.
Desert. So it started with the physical challenge, and then it had switched to I had to do an event in the year ahead because I'd become an adventurer, and that was fueling my speaking business. So I started to do the events for the wrong reason,
Okay.
and as a result, they became it was just all wrong. Didn't enjoy the event, didn't want to be there, didn't train hard enough, but still got the Everest marathon on my CV, if you like. So the South Pole, there was no satisfaction that came with that. The South Pole race was a much bigger physical challenge. Financially, it was huge. I had to raise. Originally, it was going to €150,000. I didn't have that money. I didn't know if I could make it to the South Pole. The training was grueling for the year. The doubts about whether we could do it at all were there. The doubts about whether we could get the money. And even when we were down there, the doubts about whether I could keep going for 40 days, up to 16 hours a day. So, but that risk of failure meant that the pursuit of success and the ultimate achievement of success was all the sweeter, and there was a sense of contentment much more than a short-term champagne popping moment. It was I was there for the right reasons. The failure was important, and that led to the contentment.
That's interesting. And that was the 10th anniversary. Is that right? Of you going blind?
Yeah. There was. Of course, I mean, none of these things should matter. Like 9 years, 10 years, like it shouldn't matter. But it felt like the South Pole 10 years after going blind was a suitable marker that I dealt with the blindness, that I put the demons of blindness behind me. But it took 10 years for me to really deal with the blindness. And I was working and was living on my own, and was back socializing. I'd done a master's, I'd got a job, I'd created my own business. So I had surely dealt with the blindness, but really it took that South Pole race to really prove that I'd moved from feeling like a spectator when I went blind, that in some way everything was outside my control and I was on the sidelines, to stepping into the arena and being a contender, being a competitor at the South Pole, competing in my own personal Olympic Games. That took 10 years, and I didn't know in year one that I was going to find it at the South Pole. I didn't start 10 years before thinking going to the South Pole is my ultimate goal.
Yeah.
It evolved and emerged over time by doing things that I was enjoying.
Yeah. And that can be the challenge, can't it? Because even if we did know, even if it was a long time, like a decade, if we knew there's a place where we will finally feel a sense of completion or contentment or whatever, we might be able to keep going. But it's sometimes when you feel like life is so messy and it's all disconnected, isn't it? Meaning kind of happens kind of when we look back on it in retrospect, kind of thing. And could I just ask you, because for a lot of people, they might feel, oh, well, if they listen to this, and you might feel, oh, he's just different. He's kind of like, he's just made that way. He has this incredible mental resilience and strength. And, if there was somebody who would say, well, something, mine is very different. It's a financial problem. It's a relationship problem, whatever it might be. Could you say something to speak to that person that's listening or watching and thinking, how can I relate what Mark is saying to my perhaps seemingly very different life?
Yeah. Well, look, they at risk of having a soundbite to give you. I do think the simplification of our challenges is the key, and everything that I've just spoken to you about really comes down to this kind of central principle that sometimes we have the luxury of choosing our challenges, and sometimes challenges choose us. What we decide to do about them, that's what counts, and that's the only thing we can control. What do we do now? What do we decide to do next? That's up to us. We can't control the challenges that have appeared.
Okay. And just in terms of the, there's a lot of talk in the wellness industry now about, work-life balance and that kind of thing. Now, I can't really talk about what you've achieved in terms of balance. It's very extreme. And I do notice that it's the people that the really high achievers, and if you look at the people that, Netflix documentaries, there'll probably be one on you as well. These really, really high, high achievers, that are kind of, on Netflix at the moment. They're very passionate. There's a kind of a passion, what I'd call a passionate imbalance, isn't there? That actually it's when you get that sense of just not almost kind of being woken in the middle of the night because you're excited about a project. Did that hit you? And do you think that's needed?
Yeah, it certainly. But I do these with our team. We do these personality profiles, and with all of their imperfections. But we've done the same one for years and years and years. And your profile, a lot of people have one profile in work and one profile outside work. So they're dialing things up that they're not naturally inclined to do outside work. They dial that up inside work, and that's very tiring. And that speaks, I think, to your point, this work-life balance. Like, in some way, work should be one thing and life should be another thing. There's something in it. Now, I happen to think, if I go back to these flow states, flow and this very high optimal performance state only happens whenever you take rest and recovery as high performance non-negotiables. So I'm not so the idea that life is rest and work is where you work hard doesn't really stack up, because a lot of people's life, with children and finances and admin and so on, is pretty tiring. Some people like to go to work to get a rest. But I think the underlying principle is important. Of there's some stuff which is just necessarily difficult. There's some stuff where we just feel and perform at our best. But if you miss out on the rest and recovery, rest being little breaks throughout the day, all of the time, recovery being big conscious breaks. If you don't do the rest and recovery as a high performance non-negotiable or an optimal performance non-negotiable, then you just stay in the struggle phase where life and work is a struggle, and you don't ever get into this sort of optimal performance state. So the danger for someone like me and lots of other people who are really into what they do is that it can become an excuse for not taking any breaks. That's just a low performance choice. So if you're really into it, you got to be even more conscious and careful of taking rest and recovery seriously.
Yeah. Now, Mark, I know that we've got you've got the Run in the Dark event coming up soon. Can you tell us a little bit about the background to that? What it's raising money for, and it's coming up on November 14th and 15th.
Yeah.
So very soon in 50 plus countries, cities worldwide, including Dublin. So if you could just tell a little bit about the experience. I know in some of your videos you talk about the first time you once again, after becoming paralysed, that you were once again able to raise your knee to your chest. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then into Run in the Dark?
Yeah, well, coming out of hospital, I switched from going to the South Pole and doing expeditions, and my new expedition became finding a cure for paralysis. So working with scientists and technologists, walking in robotic legs, using a spinal stimulator to promote voluntary movement. And back in 2014, I went to UCLA and spent 3 months there doing some experimental research, and I was able to voluntarily, in the early part of that study, I was able to voluntarily lift my left leg from flat up to my chest.
Yeah.
Because of the spinal stimulation. That was one of the technologies that we were using. And the reason I was able to go and offer myself up as a human guinea pig to these scientists and technologists, as I continue to do, is because of the fundraising that we were able to do through Run in the Dark. That happens in 50 cities all around the world every November. And with those 25,000 people a year giving contributions or us making a little margin from their entry fee, I was able to be a human guinea pig. And we've been able to scale up our impact now through our charity Collaborative Cures. And over the last 10 years, we've been able to create collaborations with scientists, technologists, investors, and charity people, which are now worth over $100 million. We haven't raised $100 million through Run in the Dark, but the money that we have raised through Run in the Dark has helped us to get into those conversations, to facilitate all of those different people to come together and collaborate to leverage up what they're all doing. And the spinal stimulation technology is going to be out next year, impacting people's lives in a meaningful way, not in the research context, but in the clinic.
In the clinic by next year.
Yeah. Now, it shouldn't take as long as it's taken. So our aim with Collaborative Cures is to reduce the translation of science from the lab to the clinic from 50 years to 10 years, and to have those $100 million projects as the norm rather than the massive exception, which this one is.
Yeah, that is hugely, what an exciting project. Incredible, and giving hope to so many people. So Run in the Dark, now I know the Dublin event is fully booked, unfortunately, but there are still other ways that people can get involved, either by volunteering or actually through the app. Isn't that right? If there's an app for Run in the Dark?
Yeah, so you can do it wherever. We brought this in lockdown, so when we couldn't all gather, so you can do the app run.
Did us some favours.
yeah, exactly. So you can go to runinthedark.org/app run, and you can just do the run wherever you are in the world. So if anyone says, oh, sorry, I can't be at one of the events because I'm away on business or I'm away doing this, and I always say, oh, don't worry, you can do the app run. Or Cork, Belfast, London, Luxembourg, Sydney to San Francisco. You can do it. Check on the website, and you can do it anywhere. Yeah.
And listen, guys, I think that's just something, if you are watching it or listening to this, it is something, if you can do. I presume, Mark, I mean, really, if you can't do it on that date, do it another date and just donate anyway. If you can do, that's, I think, the kind of what we need to be saying here. Just get out, get your buddies together, donate wherever you can. Runinthedark.org is the website, and you can download the app, and it's all there. And there's kind of training schedules, stretching schedules, motivation, all sorts of things on that website. And just finally, Mark, I'd just like to ask you first, one, where can people find you? And I would suggest people that actually just subscribe to Mark's newsletter, because I know the feeling of sometimes you can feel so motivated and then it goes again, and you feel so motivated and it goes again. So just you need to keep it coming, don't you? So where can they find you, and what would be your either one or a few tweak that you might suggest for people to start for their personal progress journey this week?
Yeah, well, you can find me at markpollock.com. That's POLLOCK, markpollock.com. And I think a personal tweak, and I'm speaking to myself on this, is that we know that if you don't take rest and recovery seriously, your chances of feeling your best and performing your best are practically zero. So build it into your calendars, build it into your days, your weeks, your months, your quarters, and treat rest and recovery as a high performance, optimal performance, non-negotiable, but do it consciously, build it into your calendar.
That's a great kind of mind switch from the kind of it's a bit of luxury, something to actually make it part of high performance. That is a great tweak. Mark, 1,000 thanks for being with us. I could chat to you for hours, but I know you're someone who's in demand, and I have to let you go. So 1,000 thanks, and I know that listeners and viewers will actually be logging on and hopefully get going in that Run in the Dark wherever they might be. So Mark, thank you for joining us, and very best of luck in all the fundraising and all the future projects that you have in mind. Thanks for joining us, Mark.